This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week,
if you aren't going electric today, you are throwing away several $1,000s per car per year. And who wouldn't want to save several $1,000s?
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 147 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. This episode, I sit down with Michael Benson, retired fire chief and co-founder of Command Consulting, to talk about the importance of electrifying municipal fleets and designing vehicle charging infrastructure using microgrids. If you live in a community that has police, fire, emergency services, trash collection, street sweepers, or any other vehicle owned or operated by your city, county, or state, and that should just be about everybody, then don't go anywhere. You are going to want to hear what Michael has to share. So without further ado, let's get right to the conversation. So, Michael, I want to thank you for joining me on the EV Resource Podcast. I am really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today because it is admittedly one area in the EV world that my knowledge is insufficient, where I couldn't possibly explain to somebody else beyond the surface stuff. I wouldn't be able to get deep into it. And I really want to be able to lean on your expertise and do that today. But before we get into that part of the conversation, I think it's important to bring everybody that's watching and listening to this up to speed with who you are, what your involvement is in the municipal fleet electrification, microgrid, all these things that we're going to talk about. And then almost most importantly is why you're doing this. So go ahead.
So it's a very common thing that I am an odd person in the room. It's not typical to find a retired fire chief talking with electrical engineers, electrification, and solar developers and all that kind of stuff. What happened was I was still a fire chief. It's actually 7 years ago. And I test drove a Tesla just for fun, realized what an electric car could do, reserved one of those Model 3s. And being the nerd fire chief I went down the electric vehicle rabbit hole. The key thing was recognizing that this is where we are going to go as an automotive industry 7 years ago, because Tesla had proved that it was going to work, that you'd be able to actually use electric vehicles. And one of the key factors was the amount of power in that battery pack was enough to run my whole house for a full day, even on a hot, sunny day, because I was looking at solar panels. So of course, I was looking to see what was my load at home. So I knew what that was. And I realized, wow, that would run a shift for a police car really well. Then the dynamics of an electric vehicle, which you know all about, the performance and the capabilities, the efficiencies, were perfect for a police car because they do most of the time they idle around or drive around slowly. But when they want to go fast, they want to go fast quickly. That fits the electric vehicle design. And I recognized if you have 4 or 5 of those Tesla-sized battery packs in a fire engine, you could do a full electric vehicle. But now you have 400 or 500 kilowatt hours of power. If you want to turn that around and charge it in a quick manner, you're looking for a megawatt of power or more. That's when I realized the infrastructure we need didn't exist. Of course, 7 years ago, there was no megawatt charging, which is a new thing now that's out there. I think the Tesla Semi, actually, they specifically talked about that. And they talked about it for the Cybertruck, being able to charge at a megawatt of power. So for those who don't know anything about electricity, a megawatt of power is a lot to ask because one electric vehicle is basically a house on the grid. Now you're asking for 10 of them, and you want to get that much power in 15 to 30 minutes. That's a huge demand on the grid. So we're not going to build substations for every fire station and every police station where they have shift change, where they have to change the cars over, or EMS station or a service garage. You're just not going to build substations for all of this. That's a huge thing to do. So going back to my basics physics, I was an electrical engineering major in college before I switched to fire and safety engineering. So I have the basic understanding of physics, electromechanical physics, just enough to get in trouble. But I recognized we could have a really big battery pack on the building that you would then use to charge the battery packs in the vehicles. And that's a DC-DC transfer. And staying on the DC side of things, DC being, of course, direct current, not alternating current like we have in our plugs in our house, you could put solar panels on the roof to charge that battery because that would trickle charge the battery, which keeps it healthy. And now you have what they call a microgrid. We didn't know what that was when my partner and I were thinking of this concept, but we recognized that that's one of the best ways to actually provide such a high level of power and a large amount of energy that you couldn't do otherwise without having to rebuild a whole grid, build all these substations. So the marriage of a microgrid with an electric fire truck or police cars who have to charge at shift change, ambulances, snowplows, those vehicles that are mission critical just made sense. So we were going through the process of developing our business. That's why we created Command Consulting, which we realized that there is a gap of knowledge between a municipal fleet operator or elected officials or department heads and the electrical engineering nerds who build these things, which I have to kind of sort of count myself as one of those nerds too. I'm a nerd fire chief, totally fine with that. There's a neighborhood south side of Chicago called the Bronzeville neighborhood. There's a Department of Energy study. There's actually, I think, 36 studies on this municipal microgrid. It's one of the first in the country. And one of the first studies identified that we need somebody who can speak nerd and we need somebody who can speak municipal. And if we had that person to fill that gap in knowledge, we would be able to do a lot more much faster. That's what we do. So if you are a fire chief, police chief, elected official, mayor, council member, fleet manager, service director, whatever you are for a city, and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to add electric vehicles. Well, you could do that today. You could use a 240 volt plug, give yourself what they call a level 2 charger, which I'm sure you've taught your people that listen to this podcast what a level 2 charger is. But it's essentially a dryer plug or an air conditioning circuit level of power. And if you have a vehicle that can sit and charge overnight or for several hours, works totally fine. So adding one vehicle here or there to try out an electric vehicle, we highly recommend. By the way, we have 3 levels of win for my company. Level 1 is please just try out electric vehicles. Use a leasing program, get an electric vehicle for your city, try it out. If you just do that and you take nothing else from this podcast, then that's a win because at least you're trying it out. And of course, you could just plug into a 240 volt plug you probably have in your service garage. It's when you start to think about converting the whole fleet over time that you need an infrastructure process. You need to think about the infrastructure. And that's where municipalities lack the knowledge. So my partner actually is also a retired fire chief. He actually got his PhD studying public policy for microgrids and found out that municipalities don't know anything about microgrids. And why would they, right?
Right. Yeah, that's not their area of expertise.
So that defined our business. That's where we realized what it is we're trying to do. This is interesting because this is a proven technology. This has been out there for a long time. The military is converting all of their bases with microgrids so that they have resilient power. And there are a lot of benefits to having the microgrid in addition to just charging electric fire trucks or police cars or ambulances. But what's nice is it is an investment, not a cost to a municipality. So one of the things that every municipality gets worried about is who's going to pay for all this electricity and the charging infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. Well, if you design it as part of a microgrid infrastructure for your municipality, where it offsets the energy cost of the building, well, now it pays for itself. Now you can incorporate electric vehicle charging at a high level, high power charging, megawatt level charging, and actually have it included as part of your system. So now it's not an additional cost, it's actually part of the investment, and the investment pays back, which means you can actually get one of these things built for you by an energy as a service provider, and they will build it on your city and then sell you the electricity over the how many years you set up your contract. And now you essentially can build out this infrastructure at no capital expense. You pay back by using the electricity that you purchased.
Awesome.
Okay.
Michael, I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I want to make sure I can kind of summarize to make sure that everybody's on the same page with what you've said so far.
Absolutely.
Basically, when you have energy input, and in this case, you had said solar, but it could be wind, it could be
anything, right?
Gravity battery.
A battery at night, use it during the day, whatever, right?
Battery storage, that becomes your microgrid that then we're using that battery to charge electric vehicles. And I want to touch on that too.
Yeah. Well, let me stop you for just a second.
Yes.
So a microgrid by definition is what you said, which is some kind of a power generation source and a storage device, an energy storage device, but it also has to be able to operate on its own, which means it has to be able to island. So that's the definition of a microgrid, because essentially the grid can go down, but your grid, your microgrid or mini grid or nano grid or whatever size grid it is, can stay up and operating.
Okay. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. That's a very important part of the kind of the definition of that.
Yep.
So when it comes to electric vehicles, naturally, police departments are going to have different needs than a fire station or, ambulance depot or a hospital, depending on how those are set up, or even schools with school districts.
But all of them need microgrids.
Yes.
Different styles.
And especially schools have so much roof space. Like don't even get me started on that.
We can have that conversation. That's another hour.
For sure. So which vehicles make the most sense to electrify first?
You're talking about for your municipality.
For your municipalities, yes.
Whatever the next one is that needs to be replaced.
There you go. See, that's the answer.
Stop buying internal combustion engine vehicles unless you literally don't have electricity in your garage. So just stop buying them, because most municipal fleets drive less than 100 miles in a day. So there is an electric version of every vehicle you have, all of them: trash trucks, street sweepers, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, staff vehicles, pickup trucks, class 5 dump trucks. They have all those vehicles are available electric today, and you are wasting money because it's more expensive to own and operate an internal combustion engine vehicle version than it is an electric version, especially municipal fleets, because municipal fleets, they'll come in to start their shift, whatever that shift would be, police, fire, EMS, whatever it would be, or service department, and they turn those things on and they go off to what they're doing, and they commonly sit and idle a lot during a day, which is why idle reduction is a big thing that they try to get put in place. It's why the Ford Interceptor police car that has the hybrid vehicle infrastructure is actually designed to turn off and not idle and things like that. But still, it's just not an efficient use of an internal combustion engine vehicle, because you just waste so much energy. 80% of all this energy is just lost from heat. And when you're just driving around town, it's really inefficient. But on the electric vehicle side, it's very efficient.
So I know there are a few police departments or law enforcement agencies that have already kind of tiptoed into the electric vehicle world
all over the country. Yep.
You've seen stories that are put out there by like other media outlets like EV Resource that they're centered, focused on EVs, about like the Model 3 performance or Model Y performance, making a great police vehicle. The thing with those is they don't need a megawatt of charging. The vehicles that do
but they do need a megawatt of charging if there are two factors that are in play.
Okay.
All right. So let's touch on that.
Go for it. Yeah.
If you are a law enforcement organization, law enforcement agency who assigns the vehicle to an individual officer, you don't need any help today. Just go ahead and set it up, put a plug in their garage. There's tax credits for that, which are now assignable, which means a municipality that normally could not pay or receive tax credits can now use that by assigning it to the vendor. So you can actually put in level 2 charging at the officer's home or at the station, and you'll be just fine for those agencies that assign a car to a law enforcement officer. But here's where the math gets kind of fun. But the good thing is you only have to know two numbers. I'm going to tell you two numbers you need to know. 80% representing the stated charge you should have in your vehicle before you start your shift. And in your Tesla Model Y example, that's going to be 80% of about a 77 kilowatt hour battery pack. So it's about 56 to 60. Let's just use 60 kilowatt hours you would need to charge or to be charged up. If you are at a low stated charge and you need to put 60% of that, 60 kilowatt hours back into that battery pack in 15 minutes, well, that's 60 times 4. That's the other number you got to know is 4. So that's a 240 kilowatt charger, right? That's a lot of power for one car. Most departments who have Yes, most departments who have shift change happening 3 times a day, every 8 hours, will have 4 cars plugged in at the exact same time at 240 to 250 kilowatts, which is equal
There you
to
go.
a
Hey,
megawatt of power.
how about
So there you
that?
go. So yes, so that's why a police agency also needs a
Okay.
megawatt charger level, but the system is megawatt charge
Yes.
as compared to a fire engine where it might have an individual drop that's going to be a megawatt. And what's interesting is the way they design these systems, a lot of them are modular so that you have 5 200 kilowatt chargers in series to give you a megawatt when needed, but only 200 kilowatt when you don't need it.
Sure.
And then you can plug in multiple things, and then it's intelligent, and it's controlled, and has a computer.
Kind of shares the power and figures out where it needs to go. And
yes. So yeah, if you just have 4 electric cars, yeah. And by the way, it's not just a few police departments. There are more than a dozen. There's a lot across the country. Yeah, they're all over the place, even in states where there's not a lot of support for electric vehicles. So you've got Kentucky and Ohio both have police departments with electric vehicles. You've
West
got
Virginia
Connecticut,
came to
Massachusetts. Yeah, New York City's had 10,000 electric vehicles in their fleet, and they are adding hundreds of Teslas and Mach-E's to their police department this year.
Here in Virginia, the state level fleet, their main depot is here in Richmond. And I've had the opportunity to go over there and just very briefly speak with some people, and they are talking about electrifying the entire fleet.
As they should.
Naturally, there's a lot of moving parts and everything. The one part of the conversation they didn't get to, or at least we didn't talk about, was with microgrids and how that is so important for, like you were saying, being able to charge very quickly without the needed change and improvement to the local grid infrastructure to have, but even if we were able to upgrade the grid and do that, as much as that is not the ideal solution, when you're pulling that much electricity at once, now the electric company is going to charge you a bit more.
Absolutely, yes. You have hit upon something most people don't realize.
Yeah, demand charges.
All of a sudden, you have a demand charge you've never had before. So there, I can't say which fire department, but it's in a sunny state that could easily have put solar panels. It's a new station, and they're going to get an electric fire truck in a sunny state. And they put 480 volt 3-phase power in so they can have a 150 kilowatt charger. And they have yet to plug in on a hot, sunny day in the summer. And they've never had 480 volt 3-phase power in any of their fire stations.
Oh,
so they had to pay for that. They had to pay for an expensive charger, and they are about to pay a very expensive electric bill that they have no idea is coming. You avoid all of that cost. That's one of the things when we do an analysis, we add up avoided costs as well as direct costs. And then, of course, then the savings related to it. But that's $150,000 expense that you don't have to pay, that you should not have to pay. That's a barrier to adding electric vehicles to your municipality. And it's expensive coming down the road.
Yeah, it returns an experience that people are going, this is horrible. Why did we do this?
What? Yeah, where's
this the future? Oh my goodness, no, we can't do this. That's ridiculous.
If you had solar on your roof and a battery on the building, that would offset that energy, and you would be paying the exact same amount of energy cost you pay today, but on a fixed contract over time, using energy as a service financing, which Montgomery County, Maryland pioneered for us, which is wonderful. Their transit bus fleet operator just announced publicly on the news. It was actually on a regular news channel. It was a story about their new electric bus depot. They're no longer buying internal combustion vehicles at all. They're just done because it costs them money to do so. Yeah. And it's the same for a police department. If you are driving an internal combustion engine vehicle now and you don't need 400 or 500 miles of range, and that's state troopers, which we can talk about in a little bit if you want.
Well, I wrote it down already.
Municipal fleet.
We'll get to that.
Municipal agencies, you are losing money to the tune of thousands of dollars per car per year. And now with the price of a Tesla Model Y with a $7,500 tax credit that a municipality can use that they never were able to use before, but now they can use it, the price, you're off. I mean, the estimate is around 2 years that you're going to get the difference. You'll break even, which means for the next 3 to 5 years, you are ahead. You're going to save, tens of thousands of dollars on these vehicles. So every year you're wasting 5 to 6,000. Now there is a police chief. I can't remember the name of the city up north. I think it was Wisconsin. Estimated that he was going to save $85,000 by buying electric, like a Tesla Model Y, instead of a Ford Interceptor. The only thing I have a problem with his calculation is he included the replacement of the Interceptor because you would wear out the motor, because you use the motor a lot more than you do driving. Right. So transmissions and motors go bad on police cars really more than anything else because you abuse them. Yeah. They don't on electric vehicles because it's frictionless. You use tires, but you're using tires anyway on the police car. So it's already something that's an expense that's built in. So his estimate was 80,000, but it's more like 50,000. But you can say that if you keep an electric vehicle in your police fleet, it will pay for the vehicle. And I think that's the key. In the end, it's essentially not free, but it's essentially the same. And if you lease it, which is what we highly recommend, you could get 12 to 48 to 60 month municipal leases, which are different than the kind you and I can get. They don't have all those upfront and penalties and all that kind of stuff. It is literally
restrictions and
because they know what you drive. Well, you're not going to hit that many miles because they only drive.
Well, sure.
So, but it is a whole system for municipal. So if you have a police department, especially one where the people are assigned their individual cars, if you aren't going electric today, you are throwing away several $1,000s per car per year. And who wouldn't want to save several $1,000s? And the example is Bargersville, Indiana. So Chief Bertrand over in Bargersville, Indiana, this is a central Indiana, south central Indiana city. It's a small city that had to expand its district. He looked at his Dodge Chargers, compared it to a Tesla, showed it to his municipality, his council, didn't tell them the brand, showed them what he estimated the savings to be. He's saving over $6,000 per car when gas was cheap.
Yeah.
It's even more now. He now has several cars, and he's using the Tesla dog mode for their canine car.
Awesome.
Most cars have to be converted or built on to have a canine system. You don't need that for a Tesla. It's already built in. And there's a company making a Tesla. It's called a Model PD. That's in police department, modelpd.com. Really good folks. They are using the screen that's built into the Tesla. So now you can just hit a switch and go from the TV, the screen from your Tesla to the screen for the mobile data terminal. Oh, wonderful. The police department. So they don't have to have multiple screens. You just need a keyboard, and they have a PC that goes onto it for your mobile data terminal.
Oh, that's great.
Just hit a button. This is the beginning of a new paradigm shift for law enforcement and fire and EMS and service departments, municipalities. Everything is going to get better and cheaper. And I was going to do one last comment before we move on. When you looked at the state fleet, let me guess, other than the plow trucks, they're almost all pickup trucks.
Actually, a lot of it was SUVs.
Okay. That's maybe for public safety. But in reality, they are the most often driving an inefficient vehicle, an SUV, a pickup truck, or a big, like a class 6 or class 7 dump truck. So if you just started with the pickup trucks, that's a great place to start for municipalities. Lease a Ford F-150 Lightning. It has the power of like an F-250, but it's an F-150. Unless you need to carry a heavy load or a pull, obviously you're going to get a bigger truck there. Well, then go with a commercial vehicle. Go with a commercial chassis over just a basic pickup truck. But yeah, the pickup trucks and the SUVs are the way to start. So the Mach-E's and the Tesla Model Ys are good for police. Mach-E's a little small, in my opinion, but my opinion doesn't matter. It's up to the agency as to what they want to do.
Sure. I would imagine there's a little bit of brand loyalty, maybe even subconsciously, when it comes to Ford specifically, because they've had Ford vehicles primarily for years and years and years.
One little anecdote that aligns nicely with that. Those of us who are old school, and I did 30 years before retiring, so that makes me a little bit older. We grew up on Ford Crown Vic rear-wheel drive vehicles. That's what I grew up driving. Chevy Caprice was what I had. You learned how to drive that in the snow and emergency response, all that kind of stuff. In my Tesla Model 3 with rear-wheel drive, I'm driving my old Crown Vic. As far as the way it handles, the way it operates, it's just so much better.
You had mentioned it, And I want to touch on it because this weekend was the Virginia International Auto Show. And I was there Saturday and actually had a fairly in-depth, really, really engaging conversation with the state troopers that had a booth there.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them, I said, hey, I know you guys travel all across the state. You're putting in a lot of miles on these vehicles. Has there been any discussion, anybody talking or even thinking about electrifying even a portion of the fleet? And I'm sad to tell you that the answer was no. It's not even on their radar. But the challenges that state police would experience to go electric are a little different than your county or your city fleets. From your end, what is the conversation to help the state troopers or even large counties, these municipalities that are bigger? What is it that can be said to them that can kind of help them wrap their head around this idea?
So there's two sides to this, because that's why this conversation and why we're having it, because you could talk to anybody about electric vehicles or talk to a police chief about their electric vehicles. The microgrid and the charging infrastructure design for the use case is going to be unique. So I've kind of already come up with the concept for state troopers. And I realized this, if you just pay attention to the highway while you're driving down the highway. If you are thinking like I always do, I automatically look at infrastructure design systems and what are all these rest areas, for example, have open parking areas. So you already have solar canopy style availability of power generation on your highways at regular intervals. You also have interchanges with space around the interchanges where you could put in solar panels and microgrids. You've got those turns where the emergency vehicles can turn around in the highway between the different lanes, northbound, southbound, eastbound, westbound. So all of those are typically in an area where you could, if you wanted to, you could have a microgrid. And as we've already discussed, the need for the charging is relatively high power for the moment, but for a short amount of time. Well, in those cases where they're parked or sitting for a little bit while they're picking up speeders or whatever's going on there, you can actually have a charging that's a little bit lower. The police station design has wireless charging for the police cars. The best way for them to commonly charge up their vehicles is them just to pull into a parking spot and it charges the vehicle. Well, state troopers have to go to the bathroom too. And they have to go to get lunch and things like that too. So why not have in-road electric vehicle charging on the turnouts, at the rest areas, and at their stations where they are? Now you have built an infrastructure within that 400 or 500 mile range that tops off their vehicle regularly without them realizing it just happens. Because if they park in their assigned state patrol parking spot and line up until the little green light comes on and says you're lined up, or have one of those in-ground charging that's more linear, like a line. So as long as you're parked normally in the spot, either backed in or pulled in, to be able to charge, because that's all magnet. It's all magnets, electromagnetism, and it works better when it is wet, covered in ice or snow, because it actually transmits the magnetism just a little bit better, which is hilarious. Because you would think it would be worse, right? Yeah, it boggles the mind until you start thinking, oh wait, it's magnet, not electricity transfer. So then you realize, okay, wait a second, this actually could work really, really well. Doing that provides distributed energy resources. That's one of the big benefits of a microgrid. You have power distributed all over an area. And if you use a response area for a law enforcement, like state troopers, they're going to handle a county or a portion of a county or a portion of a highway or a turnpike or something like that. That's their responsibility. If you built in this infrastructure into that area that they have, and there's charging either incidental because it just happened to be stopped on top of a charger, or they plug in on purpose, now you can eliminate the quote range anxiety. It's the exact same thing that happens when you have an electric vehicle with a lot of charging infrastructure available to you. And of course, today, the one vehicle is Tesla only because they built the infrastructure. Everybody else will eventually have the same level of infrastructure. I don't have range anxiety with my car. I can go anywhere I want because unless I really go extreme, there's a Tesla supercharger somewhere along the way. I've got a plan to go to Knoxville, Tennessee. It's going to be an 8-hour day. I'm only going to stop 3 times. I physically have to stop 3 times because I have to go to the bathroom. That's what people forget about. You don't drive 8 hours straight. You don't drive 400 miles straight unless you're a trucker, and that's a whole different battery pack, a whole different system. But yeah, the state troopers just need that infrastructure built out. And then what's nice is now you've got resources and power generation all over that response area, that county, that region. And by doing that, the grid can actually be better because most of the time you're not charging the car. Most of the time it's providing energy you can use either in the grid or to your critical infrastructure and all the other benefits you get from having these microgrids spread out all over. And what's funny is that helps to solve the electric grid problem. Before we ever had electric vehicles, the grid goes down all the time. It's exposed to the weather. People forget that you lose power on a regular basis. Well, if you had a microgrid supporting your circuit, your area where you are, if the grid went down, your area could stay up because it would just switch to the microgrid. So it provides resiliency and makes the grid smarter and better. It's just it's a win-win, and it's something where why are we not doing this? Yeah.
Yeah. So I like the idea. What you just said when I was talking with her this weekend never entered my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually kicking myself a little bit because, like,
yeah,
now hearing you say that, it's like, well, duh.
Because you get hurricanes, you get floods, you get winter storms, you get all those things, and they take the grid out, or people shooting at substations, and you lose the grid. If you have microgrids there, you then could have a lot more of it still up and running, unless like Babcock Ranch in Florida. It's a new development that has microgrids and it's designed to be hit by hurricanes, and it did. And it flooded the streets in the parks like it's supposed to. Nobody's house got flooded and nobody lost power because they have microgrids there. Yeah, they got hit by Hurricane Ian. It's exactly what we need to do, but do it statewide. So Virginia, for example, should actually put in a program and design and look at the state and say, okay, here are state trooper locations. Here are the districts they have to cover. Here's where they commonly pause, like rest areas or turnouts or their headquarters or whatever their
I know where a few of the spots are because I see them there all the time. Yeah.
Build in an infrastructure there, put microgrids in to do it, which makes it then pay for itself and offsets your energy cost, and put out an RFP to have energy service companies apply to do it for you.
Mm-hmm. They then have dedicated charging spots so they don't have to, because even the public charging infrastructure will get more numerous. It's going to exponentially increase in size in the coming years. But then also they don't have to worry about reliability as much because
rest area example. Now you have EV charging at rest areas because your state trooper needs it. And then you designing at the level to make sure they're taken care of.
Yep.
But meanwhile, when they're not using it, it's available because most people on a rest area, if you haven't already put in like a Tesla supercharger or Electrify America, high power, well, now you could put in even more, have more power available and expand it. Yeah.
I would probably want to figure out how to make it so that when the, in this case, we're talking about state police, when they needed to charge, that
it would just prioritize their rate. Right.
If it was occupied, that now that person, the public citizen gets kind of kicked off.
Well, you wouldn't have to kick them off. You just power it down because the whole idea is you have a lot of available power because you design things for a worst case scenario. That's a different way of designing it. When you're designing it for private side, you design it for profit. You design it to make it balance out well and to give you enough margin to make it an affordable thing to do. When you design for public safety, you design for function to guarantee that they'll respond. And that's if you want, because we're talking about mission. That's truly the mission we have. We want electric vehicles to work for police, fire, EMS, snowplows. Mission critical fleets have to have mission critical microgrids, patent pending. And you need to have those available so that this will work, so that they will not fail and they will be able to respond. But what's nice is we found out not only will not fail, you're going to make the grid better. You're going to make that whole system better. The cars are nicer. But as you know, as an electric vehicle owner, it has driven some time, I'm guessing, at high speed, since you have a lot of fun at your event. That's where electric vehicles lose their most efficiency. And that's why your Aptera that you mentioned, potentially getting your Aptera down the road, it's one of the very, very few that are so efficient that can actually make it without having to get charged, because the solar and the efficiency, that the low drag coefficient. But for everybody else, driving at highway speed that's how you eat up a lot of your battery power.
Yeah.
So let's build out infrastructure that not only is good for the state troopers, but because we design it too big, we can have the capacity to accommodate the public as well. Plus, technically, if the state owns it, the public paid for it.
Right.
Even if we're using energy as a service financing, so there's no capital expense. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that, I mean, believe it or not, states are looking at. There is actually a North Carolina, South Carolina kind of a plan thing. How can we design our infrastructure so that if we did have electric vehicles, they could also escape from a hurricane on an evacuation route? What type of infrastructure will we need to build? Well, just build out what you need for your public safety. You'll have enough also to do for the public.
So you obviously have a lot more conversations with people all across the country about this, much more than conversations that I'm having specifically about this topic. I'm curious what objections that people that they're not exposed to the electric vehicle world or microgrids or clean energy, what is a common objection that you get on a regular basis from the people that you're talking with?
Well, the biggest lift is the understanding. So literally the conversation we just had is what they don't think is possible, nor do they understand all the ramifications of it, and which are almost all positive. That's the crazy thing. I heard in a city electric vehicle task force, the response was, well, solar panels they're expensive, they don't work that well, and batteries are too expensive. Boom. So the conversation stopped. I said, well, actually, I looked at your parking lots. Believe it or not, your parking lots are worth millions of dollars. And I got laughed at because they said, how could it possibly be that our parking lots are worth millions of dollars? Well, because if you cover the parking lots with solar panels, which what else are you doing on top of a parking lot? Nothing. And actually, France has passed a law that says if you have parking lots of certain size or more, you have to cover them in solar panels, because why not? And I looked up, so there were 9, I can't tell you which city, but it might happen to be somewhere near where I live in Northeast Ohio. I looked at 9 parking lots. They're worth $1 million a year in energy generation. $1 million a year. They pay for themselves in less than half their lifetime. And then from that point forward, it's all clean revenue. You could afford to rebuild the parking lots, put in the solar panels and the charging, and not have to pay for that capital by financing it with energy as a service financing. And now you have electric vehicle charging for free, clean energy that you can use, and it's covered parking, which provides, of course, a preferred parking level of service. I mean, you would want to park where that is. Plus, anybody with an EV now has no excuse not to get one. Why not put it next to where you have low-income housing? Use an EV rideshare for now. And once electric vehicles are less expensive and they can afford to buy them, those people who are economically disadvantaged would now have charging already there. And all you're doing is monetizing the sunshine that hits the parking lot, which is UV degradation and destroys your parking lot anyway. So understanding this technology, not believing that this works, even when you point out examples, it already does work. So we are lucky in Northeast Ohio. We actually have a trucking company called Pitt, Ohio. And Pitt, Ohio actually designed a solar and wind and storage microgrid for their depot that they have up in Parma, Ohio, and got an award for it and actually patented it. And they're doing a great work, and it's proving the example, because there's the trucking industry version of the exact same thing. Because like we said before, municipalities need this. Schools should be doing this. Trucking companies are going to need to do it to be able to provide megawatt charging for big semis and that kind of stuff. And it's just figuring out, where do the vehicles pause for a certain amount of time, and if they pause for 15 minutes while the state trooper goes to the bathroom, well, then they'll charge up in 15 minutes and there's no issue with charging, and you have plenty of range.
I think we have actually covered all of the questions that were submitted.
Boy, that was easy.
Yeah, well, and in hindsight, that makes sense, because the general knowledge of what people have, and even for me, I had told you I wasn't going to prepare a whole bunch of questions myself, because I almost don't know what questions to ask.
And this can get deep, because I didn't even get into the other benefits. because there are what we call stacked values. Another one of the things we run into is just this not belief, this disbelief of how could we possibly use electric? It just doesn't work. I'm so used to diesel. This makes no sense. And I say to the fire folks, in 1903, every fire department was run with horses. In 1923, nobody ran horses. It's 1903. At the big fire show in Indianapolis in April, last year there were 4 electric fire trucks on the floor. The year before that, there was 1. This year, there'll be 4 from 1 manufacturer, which means there will probably be a dozen or more at the show. There are more than a dozen electric fire trucks around the world already running emergency calls every single day. And if they're doing it successfully 90 to 95% of the time on electric only. So this already works. We know it works. It's just this belief, getting over this concept. So I'll send you the flyer with the police one that has the charging in the parking lot, because why not? Because they pull in and they park in the same spots all the time. We'll just put charging there for them. And if they need it, you can put a high powered plug one just in case for that disaster or that unique situation. You could do the same thing for state troopers. You could do it for emergency medical services. Every hospital should have microgrids. There's a whole healthcare microgrid industry. Why shouldn't they have resilient power? Because resiliency is another one of the benefits. But one of the ones I hit on that I would like to focus just a tiny bit is that equity piece. Most folks who are disadvantaged or taken advantage of are the folks who can't afford to fight back. And those are the areas where you see a lot of fossil fuel generation. Like they have to live next to a power plant or some smelly place or whatever they do. Yes, whatever it would be. If you can put clean energy development in those areas, well, now they would have availability. Like I said, put in an EV car share today, but then that'll provide electric vehicle charging. So multi-unit dwelling developments, you can use the thing called block energy, where you actually use solar on a whole bunch of different buildings, tie them all together with a shared resource. And that's kind of like that Babcock Ranch down in Florida, which rich people get. Well, let's put that in the places where the folks who have been taken advantage of over time should get investment back to them. So there's a lot of parts to the whole microgrid thing that can make a lot of good benefits to it beyond just charging an electric vehicle, but that's the reason to do it. The reason to do it is we need it anyway. So now let's do it in a smart way in places where people who probably couldn't afford it can get it. And then when they can afford the electric vehicles, which should be about 3 to 5 years, because the battery prices had a little bloop up just because of all the supply chain issues. But the volumes, of course, if you probably pay attention to this and look at this stuff on your news, so much development is coming back to the US and a lot more batteries are going to be built. The prices are going to go down. And in just a few years, they'll be able to afford an electric vehicle. And now the charging will already be there if we do it right. And the Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law with the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, all this stuff. If you use a microgrid to provide electric vehicle charging, you get all the bonus points on that National Electric Vehicle Initiative. So absolutely, every state, every municipality should be doing it this way. It's just whether they're already thinking in this concept.
So is that the biggest hurdle to overcome when we're actually talking, like conceptually, everything that you said is awesome and it makes sense, and it's like, okay, well, we should have done this 20 years ago.
Yeah, but you're drinking the Kool-Aid with me. You're already down.
I am. So
yeah.
what is it like? Why aren't we seeing more progress with this? Is it just that this is somewhat of a relatively new technological advancement and we didn't have the ability to do it before and now we can? Or is there something more going on?
No, I actually think it's the former. A friend of mine actually coined a phrase, and I'm going to ruin it, but this is common technology or proven technology uncommonly used or not commonly used. It's just something that we know what this stuff is. Nobody really knows how it works, but we know it does. But we didn't think, well, why would I need that for a fire truck? It just doesn't make any sense. And it's completely changing. It's a paradigm shift, which is why having a conversation like this on a podcast like yours is very useful. And actually, I just did a presentation last August. It was the first time I was asked to come to a public safety fleet forum. It was actually an expo to talk about microgrids. Before, it's always just talking about the vehicles. But now we're actually talking about the infrastructure. And I like, whether you agree or don't agree, current administration, that politics aside, the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure bill is actually going to do a lot for America by Americans, which is really, really good. So the vehicles manufacturing and the microgrids, one of the biggest solar builders is here in Ohio, but we're very excited at Perrysburg, Ohio, for solar. So it's good for our economy, and it's also good for us. And then, by the way, if you are very much into the climate, which of course we'd all like to have clean air, clean water, we all agree, this is a smart thing to do too. It hits all the boxes. It really is a win-win for everybody. So why wouldn't we do it? It's just not understanding that you can, or why, or how. And that's literally why we created this business, to try to help folks go from, we want to do something, well, how do we do it? And of course, there are lots of folks, the real nerds, the real engineers who know how to do this stuff, that are out there to build it.
It sounds like the biggest need right now is the same need that we have with electric vehicles.
Yes.
In general, people need to be given the proper information. And as much as I try to be unbiased, I know I have a natural bias towards electrification of transportation.
You're a geek like
what
me,
I'm doing.
Right?
Yeah. So, but that's not. That comes from experience with it.
Yes.
It's not like I just made this up and I'm like, oh, they're better, so I'm going to talk about it.
Why am I excited about this? Because I know it works,
yes.
And I also know we need to do it. Right.
So I think we need, what we need to do is educate people, but then give them access to actual real world solutions that are already happening. Yes. Give them examples, but then have them get hands-on with these things. So I would imagine a big part of what you're working with is to provide those examples and that information.
Yep.
What is probably the best thing that a listener or somebody who's watching this, what can they do? They might not work for a municipality or be a police officer or a fireman or EMS. What is it that your everyday person can do to affect change in this area, and actually something that will result in a noticeable change?
Well, let's give three things. One, I have to give a shout out to the Ashville, North Carolina Critical Services Microgrid group. I ended up joining their group. They brought me in because I'm the electric vehicle nerd from the public safety side. They didn't have a public safety person, but they're doing some incredible work in showing people how this works by using old golf carts. They take a almost going to be thrown away, worn out gasoline golf cart. They convert it to electric. They put solar panels on it, and it is now a mobile microgrid. And that has made a huge difference. So Warren Wilson College is outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And Warren Wilson College is actually looking at doing microgrids for their whole fleet, their facilities and their fleet, which is what the municipality should do. So hopefully we'll get that built out and show them. Here's an example. Meanwhile, seniors, as part of college students, as part of their electrical engineering studies, their mechatronics engineering studies, because UNC Asheville works with Warren Wilson because they complement each other. I don't think Warren Wilson has the engineering degrees. I think UNC Asheville does. And they actually have been working on these golf carts. And now they are mobile microgrids. And then they drive them around. And even the administration of the colleges look at it and they're like, wait, what does that do? I don't have to plug it in. Oh, we have some kind of event going on, and instead of running a little generator, they just plug into the mobile microgrid. We're working off of solar? Really? It amazes people that they're actually doing it and making it happen. The other thing you and I had mentioned before, and I don't know if that was on the beginning of the talk, I think it was before we started recording, generation180.org or gen180.org. Really good resource, especially for folks who are thinking about this kind of thing and how do they do it for their hometown or their school system or whatever they're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of toolkits that they have available. But the last one is if you are aware and you recognize that your taxpayer dollars go toward the cost of buying vehicles, which it does, then why can't you ask as the customer, the resident, and say, are we looking at electrifying our police fleets? Because it's thousands of dollars every year that we should be saving money on that. And if you're just going to get a small car for the zoning inspector, are you getting an electric one? You just have to ask. and that your city council, the service director, your police chief, your fire chief, whomever, you just ask and go to one of your local meetings, your school board meetings or your city council meetings, and don't be mean. Don't be belligerent. Just say, hey, are we looking at electric vehicles? I heard that they actually save us money, which they do in almost every use case. So just ask, what's our plan for electrification here in our town? And what I refer people to a concept of a policy that we recommend. Any municipality, electric first. And the whole point is, if you're buying a powered tool, equipment, vehicle, apparatus, whatever it is there an electric version available? So look at electric first. Do a total cost of ownership analysis. How much does it really cost to own this for 5 to 10 years? And then compare that to an internal combustion engine one. And if it's cheaper to do internal combustion engine, fine, then go that way. But if you do electric first, you won't be buying gasoline chainsaws anymore. You won't be buying lawnmowers that are gasoline anymore. Or blowers. The electric versions of those are much cheaper to own and operate because you don't buy the fuel, you don't have to do the oil. And my perfect example is fire departments. You know those jaws of life they use to cut people out of cars? They were normally powered by hydraulics with a small internal combustion engine motor, like a little Honda generator motor. They don't buy those anymore. They buy battery operated. And they've been doing it for several years now. Why? Because they're better, faster, cheaper. They aren't doing it to be green. They aren't doing it it's because they're better and cheaper and lighter, safer to operate. And they operate within seconds instead of it takes a minute and a half to get that motor up and running and pull out the lines and connect everything. So it's just a better way to go. So once people start to do that and have that electric first policy, then they start changing their mindsets. And then, so ask your municipality to adopt an electric first policy and say, hey, why not electric? And same thing for school buses. Why not?
So what I would like to do, because we are kind of running into that point where I want to be respectful of the audience time.
Yeah,
I try to keep these to about an hour. I want to really give people a lot of resources, and I am going to most likely have on the screen a list of web links, or definitely in the show notes, people can click on a bunch of different stuff. But outside of that, let's say somebody that's watching or listening to this is a decision maker within a municipality. How do they get in touch with you? And what's the best way to approach starting to talk about projects and solutions like this?
As far as for us to get a hold of us, you can go to commandconsultingllc.com. Don't forget the LLC. They wanted to charge me thousands of dollars not to have to do the LLC. So commandconsultingllc.com. Go to our website and click on the contact information. You get me or my partner.
Well, Michael, I want to thank you so much for your time and your knowledge and expertise that we can lean on that to really teach people something that I would bet that they didn't know. So with that, I want to thank you very much, and we'll go ahead and end it for today.
Awesome.
All right, so I am going to end the episode for today, just in the interest of time. Obviously, we're pushing an hour, so I am going to record a second podcast episode, likely tomorrow, to get that out maybe Thursday or Friday, depending on how long it takes me to edit. But that will catch up on the latest EV news. I will have the question of the week and the EV resource hotline included at the end of that episode. So that'll be more similar to the regular podcast episodes. So before I end this episode, I want to thank our Patreon supporters. At the director tier, we have Rajeev, Narayan, and Andy Cooper. And then at the executive producer tier, Chris Lawrence. Because I do not charge money for the EV Resource podcast or the magazine, nothing is behind paywalls. There are no mandatory fees. I am supported by those that are on Patreon, as well as through affiliate connections and advertising. On the EV Resource webpage, I do have a full list of all the affiliate connections and advertisers. Please consider supporting those companies that are supporting EV Resource and help make this possible. I want to thank all of you for watching and listening. Stay tuned for that second episode in the next couple of days. It'll be up, and I'll catch you next time.